So welcome. As Panjali said, we're going to give some results from our the graveyard survey, which is ongoing in at St Fachnan's graveyard in Kilfenora at the moment. So I'm just going to give some background. First of all, in 2024, last year, the Drumcliff Union of Churches was awarded funding under the Heritage Council Community Grant Scheme to produce a draft report assessing the heritage condition of St Fachnan's graveyard in Kilfenora, which is a recorded monument in its own right. And to inform this report, we needed to carry out a survey. So we teamed up with the Elaine Lynch and the Burrenbeo Conservation Volunteer Group of the Burrenbeo Trust, who surveyed the graves over a number of days last year. And then in the present year, Drumcliff received some more funding to complete the survey and to complete the report and to carry out a little bit more analysis into the results of our findings from last year. So in this presentation, I'll just give a bit of background I'll just give the historical background of the site, first of all, followed by a little bit of information about what you might achieve from carrying out a graveyard survey, why you would want to do that, and then I'll go into a little bit of detail about the graveyard survey results that we've got so far. So first of all, this is sorry, now the quality of this isn't great, but just to give you a sense of, I know most of you probably know where Kilfenora is, but just in case, it's a village in North Clare in the townland of Kilfenora, the barony of Kirkham Row, and the civil parish of Kilfenora also. And the church and graveyard of St Fachnan is located to the north of the village there. And Kilfenora has its origins in an early ecclesiastical settlement. So from the 5th century AD, Christianity began to be adopted in Ireland, and with it came new monument types, new burial practices, along with the introduction of writing and record making. And the practitioners of the new faith set up ecclesiastical sites where they could live, work, and study together. So one of these sites was established at Kilfenora, and it's attributed to St Fachnan. And as you can see, well, you can just see here in this upper image, there's the layout of the cathedral and the graveyard, and you can see these CL016, 015013. These are all RMP numbers for the site. There's another RMP number which is out of the screen here, but it is for the ecclesiastical enclosure. So we don't know exactly where the ecclesiastical enclosure would have been. It was probably an oval or a D-shaped enclosure. They were usually earth and stone, but there are some records of enclosures that have been excavated in the Dingle and the Iveragh peninsulas, which were made of stone, which were walled in stone, and probably given the preponderance of cashels and stone settlements in this area and just the amount of stone in general, it's possible this enclosure was walled in stone as well. So it was probably the present day site of the cathedral is probably within the original ecclesiastical enclosure. So these enclosures were they're called proto-towns. They have been referred to as proto-towns because they fulfilled a lot of the services that we associate with towns in the present day, even though there was no such thing as actual towns at that point in time in Ireland. So the first record we have of St Fachnan's Cathedral in Kilfenora is from 1055, when it was burnt by a grandson of Brian Boru called Murta O'Brien. And we're told the church was rebuilt by 1058, and it was one of the finest in Ireland at that time. There's just one of Elaine's nice aerial images showing the church in its context of the cathedral there. In 1152, Kilfenora was named as a diocese under the Synod of Kells, and at that time the church became a cathedral. So the church was smaller at that point, but it's thought that the earliest part of the church might be around this area on the north side of the nave to the east end. That it's been rendered now so you can't see it, but there's some what we call cyclopean masonry, so large blocks forming the wall at this point in the nave. So the first record of a bishop in Kilfenora dates to 1189. And the creation of the diocese in this area and the construction of a substantial stone cathedral indicates that the area was of some significance and status at this point in the 12th century. The high crosses were probably carved around this time as well, maybe to commemorate Kilfenora being declared as a diocese. So you can see some of them here. This is the one in the center is a close-up image of the West Cross, which is the only one which is standing in its original location, a short distance to the west of the cathedral and the graveyard. And then this one on the left-hand side is called this is the North Cross, and then the one on the right-hand side is called the Doherty Cross. And this is it's called the Doherty Cross because it was actually parts of it, fragments of it, were used for a long time to mark the grave of the Doherty family in the cathedral. I suppose not realizing that it was actually a medieval carved high cross. So it was reassembled, I think, in 1956, and it was put back in place, and it's now put in place in the Lady Chapel of the cathedral. And at the bottom of the cross, actually, you can't see it in this picture, but there is an upside down IHS carved into it from when it was used as a grave marker. These are the West Cross and the Doherty Cross are both ringed crosses. So this is a type of Celtic cross. So they have little rings supporting, well, not little, but rings supporting the arms and the head of the cross, and they have a structural function, but they also symbolize sort of they symbolize the never-ending, the infinite power or the infinite power or love of God as well. So, and obviously high crosses were carved all around the country at monastic sites and in this period. So several additions were made to the church over time. This is a present day view of the chancel. So looking east, excuse me. This was added in the 13th century, and the triple light window in the chancel exhibits the transitional style between the Romanesque and the Gothic, which came slightly later. And there's some nice features in here, like to the left of the picture, you can see there's a nice cusped sedilia there. I have a picture, I think a more detailed picture of it in the next slide. And then that's on the right-hand side of the screen, you can see the outside of the chancel there that was added in the 13th century. And slightly later again, this glass-roofed structure is called the Lady Chapel. So this might have served as some sort of sacristy or robing area. And obviously the glass roof is quite a recent addition. The glass and steel roof was added in the early 21st century by the OPW. And at that point, there was the high crosses, 4 of the high crosses were placed inside in the Lady Chapel for their protection. And then inside the cathedral, so following the dissolution of the monasteries in 1538, the Church of St Fachnan was retained as the parish church of the Church of Ireland. So at that, following that, in the 1800s, architect James Payne, who was the architect of the Board of First Fruits, remodeled the interior. So he cut off the chancel. So as you can see, the chancel now is unroofed. So it did have a roof up until I think the beginning of the 19th century. But in the 1830s, it was remodeled. So the chancel was cut off from the nave and a window put at the end of the nave. And this is a picture of the double pulpit inside. But I think the original plans that James Payne had were for a triple pulpit, which would have been very special altogether. But it's still quite special because it is a very unusual survival of 1830s church interior furnishings in the Church of Ireland. Because a lot of Church of Ireland churches would have been completely remodeled at the end of the 19th century with the Gothic revival. So this is a nice little survival that we have here in Kilfenora. So there's several monuments, including wall memorials and floor slabs in the chancel of the cathedral, including this one. This commemorates the 5 children of Neptune and Isabella Blood, who all died within a 12-year period from 1688 to 1700. So it's quite a nice. This is written in Latin. So there's a few other little memorials in there, and then just getting on to the actual graveyard element. Then we can assume that since the establishment of the monastic site here, there've been people buried on this site, and we don't have records, or there's no monuments for the vast majority of those. At some point, people started using stone, just rough, uncut stone, in order to mark graves. And it was only from probably around maybe the 16th century, I think, in England, and slightly later in Ireland, that middle class people, we'll say, would have started to have inscribed headstones detailing their names and their dates of death. So prior to that, people, especially the poorer people, would only have had maybe little stones, unmarked, like uncut stones, undressed stones to mark their graves. So these are just an example of 2 of those in the graveyard in Kilfenora, and there's quite a few of them dotted around. So we've no way of knowing who's in those graves. Some of these might be, you often see that there's a little bit of worked edging on them or something. So they might actually be architectural fragments that have been removed from the building at some point and reused as grave markers. So, what can you learn from looking at graveyards? Grave markers are a significant part of every culture. First and foremost, they're a monument to the deceased. They tell us something about the individual who created them. We often see masons' marks on the gravestones that we've looked at. They tell us something about the social practices of the time. They can tell us information about the geology of the area, the topography. They vary in form, fabric, and detailing from graveyard to graveyard and from religion to religion. And there's some photos here of graveyards from around the world. So in the top left-hand corner, you can see this is Père Lachaise in Paris. This lovely colorful one is in Mexico. This white one behind me there is in Cuba. And then below is La Recoleta Cemetery in Buenos Aires, where Evita Perón is buried. And then in the center, Whitby Graveyard in Yorkshire. But you can see Whitby, the Abbey of Whitby behind there. And then Bully's Acre in the bottom left-hand corner in Dublin City. So you can see from these, I think you can get a sense that each graveyard is very coherent in its form, whether it's coherent in its extravagance or coherent in its simplicity. And you get a sense of I think you can kind of even tell from looking at them, especially if you compare the Mexican one and the one in Whitby, you get a sense of the extravagance or the colorfulness of Mexican culture, and then contrast with the sobriety of the north of England, maybe. So I think it's interesting to see what a graveyard can express about a country and about the place. As archaeologists, obviously, we learn a huge amount from burials of the past, the deposition of cremated remains in communal graves in a megalithic tomb, for example, to the crouched burials accompanied by grave goods in earthenware pots, which we associate with the Bronze Age, to the practice which has persisted to the present day of prone extended burials. And so we note when human remains are found in unusual positions, and we theorize on what the meaning might be. Harold Migham, who has done a lot of research on graveyards and graveyard study, notes of these places that as evidence of past generations, their attitudes to life and death and the social and belief structures of their communities, they are invaluable. As community members, graveyards are a focal point in our towns and villages, and also in Ireland of our rural areas, because so many graveyards are associated with medieval parish churches, which are no longer in use. The stones The stones you often use as rough markers for graves of people whose families could not afford official inscribed stone. And for some of us who can count one or more family members among those interred in a burial ground, graveyards are a place of mourning and remembrance. And of course, they can also be of considerable interest to genealogists, with burial records and inscription providing vital clues to dates of birth and dates of death and family relationships. So a digital record of a graveyard is of considerable value, making information readily available and searchable worldwide. So why carry out a graveyard survey? Mainly to create a record of the information provided there. So we can utilize the headstone inscriptions. Memorials are undergoing constant weathering, and as such, it is crucial to record the inscriptions before they're weathered or removed otherwise, to the extent that it's not possible to see them anymore. So a detailed record of the inscriptions is usually included, as well as other details such as measurements of the headstone, the fabric that it's carved from, the shape of it, any decorative details or motifs, or even you might look at things like the font of the inscription, what sort of font was being used at particular points in time. And the record can be digitized in order to create an easily accessible, searchable database, which is beneficial to those researching family history. So this is just some pictures of St Fachnan's graveyard and some of the Burrenbeo Conservation Volunteers out in action last year. The subject site, you can see a wider aerial view there on the top picture of showing St Fachnan's graveyard outlined in red. And it has a trapezoidal plan, so it's slightly wider at the east end than it is at the west end. It is 0.46 acres in size, and as you can see, it's orientated east-west, and the Church of St Fachnan, the Cathedral of St Fachnan, is located to the east and north of the site. It is the graveyard wall was probably built. I have a picture there. The map, the clip of the map for I think this map dates from 1908. So you can see the outline of the wall there, and that wall was shown also on the first edition map, which dates from 1838. These graveyard walls were probably built around the early 1800s. So actually, the graves might go beyond. There's a strong possibility that there are graves going beyond the boundaries that are enclosed by this wall, because the wall was probably built to create an easily definable sort of square enclosure, rectangular enclosure around the church. This is the wall. This is the limestone wall, which is enclosing the church on all sides. There are two entrances. So on the left-hand side, on the left-hand side is the entrance at the east end. So it's just a low door opening in the wall. And then the main entrance is at the west side and accessible from a lane going out onto the street. And this has a nice arched doorway within a little raised wall, and it has nice tooled stone surrounds and a wrought iron gate. And there's a pathway running through the graveyard. It goes from that gate at the west, and it goes all the way around the cathedral. On the south side of the cathedral, there's some steps just here, and the path continues up along, and then it sort of peters out as it comes to the end, and the area is enclosed in graves. So the layout of the graves is generally quite irregular. There are some rows which appear to adhere to a grid pattern, particularly to the north of the cathedral, the older graves that are there. And there are several distinct rows of graves, but there are anomalies in spacing where some graves might cross over a couple of rows. So that's just an image of the graves at the west end. So the first step in the survey process was to create a plan of the graveyard showing the location of each grave in relation to the cathedral at the centre. So an aerial survey was carried out. So Elaine carried out this survey and created a plan of all of the graves. So there are 211 graves here. As you can see, she has the yellow she is a color coded. So the yellow indicates the headstones, the green indicates the plots, the gray indicate the limestone slabs, and then the buildings are in blue and the wall is in red. So this is essential to have an accurate plan of the graveyard, because it facilitates the easy numbering of categorization of the graves and memorials for further study. So the location of the walls, the paths, the buildings also provide a record of the layout of the site at this particular moment in time. So 4 survey days were carried out in 2024, including one which was held during Heritage Week as a Heritage Week event. And community members were invited to participate through the Burrenbeo Conservation Volunteers group. So I'm sure some of you are tuned in this evening. So I just would like to take this opportunity to say a big Muila Buyakas to all of you, because they do really excellent work in all sorts of areas, heritage and beach cleans and all sorts of things. And we had 49 volunteers through the Burren Conservation Volunteer Group come. So I've put all of your names at a slide at the end, but thank you very much for all of your help this year and last year. So a survey record sheet was created. Survey record sheet was created to provide a format for recorders who worked in pairs to record each headstone. And this allowed us to create a clear, consistent and concise record of each grave marker. And then we photographed each grave as well. So we'd have a visual, we'd have at least one representative photo of each grave, as well as additional photos for details, for example. So, as I mentioned, there's about 211 graves, with 2 exceptions. These are all orientated east-west, with the inscribed faces of the headstones facing east. And the graveyard is interesting in that it contains burials from both the Church of Ireland and the Roman Catholic community locally. And most of the Church of Ireland burials are in the north corner, and most of the later ones on the west and south are from the Roman Catholic community. The traditional material employed in the headstones, as well as the walls and the construction of the church itself, is limestone. So there is most of the headstones you can see there are limestone, and there's a carved detail over the main entrance to the cathedral, which is also limestone. So this is a sedimentary rock, which is the bedrock of about half of the country, and where it is abundantly available, it is the most popular choice for construction. It's an attractive stone for masons and builders due to factors including it has a range of colours from dark blue to silver grey. Its durability and resistance to the wind and rain give it longevity, and its ease of working, being relatively easy to cut and carve, also make it an attractive option. So historically, grave markers, like all buildings, were made from locally available materials, with structures and monuments alike reflecting the local geology. They were carved by hand, and the elegant form of these early stones, with finely executed detailing, attest to the skill and expertise of the masons who created these designs. Hand-cut lettering was a precise skill and a time-consuming activity which greatly adds to the character and appeal of historic headstones. Most of the old limestone headstones survive, although there is an increasing tendency for replacement with polished granite. So we recorded 45 new polished granite headstones now in place in the graveyard. In recent decades, imported polished granite has become increasingly popular, primarily due to its cost effectiveness in comparison with local materials. Grey or pink granite is polished to a high shine, and incised lettering is highlighted by gold detailing. And due to the high contrast between the lettering and the stone, there's a perception that this material will weather well and the inscription will remain clear. In the present day, it's no longer thought to be cost-effective to hand-cut lettering and decorative details, so these are normally created by machine now. So there's a number of incidences of limestone headstones, which actually have a panel, later inscribed panels affixed. So we have a few of those. There's 2 examples of those here. You can just about see on the one on the left-hand side where the panel has been put on top. So it's possible that there is an earlier inscription on these headstones beneath, but we won't know. We don't know unless we can remove the panels, which we're obviously not going to do. But they might have inscriptions preserved beneath. So this, in a way, is a preferable option to the gravestone actually being removed altogether or changed altogether. There's quite a few different shaped headstones represented in the older graves of the cathedral graveyard. I've focused on the older ones. Obviously, I'm not going to go into a lot of the newer ones, but these simple square-headed ones would be among the oldest of the upstanding memorials anyway in the graveyard. And as you can see, if you look, I think I have a close-up of this one on the left later on, but just there's lovely Roman font. It's just very, very nicely carved. Oops, sorry. And then we have the round-headed ones. So there's quite a few round-headed ones as well, and they're quite simple also. And these styles have persisted as well up until the present day. And then in the late 19th century, I mentioned the Gothic revival. So this resulted in the adoption of motifs which remain popular today, including pointed arches, trefoils. So this is in the central picture today. This is what I mean by a trefoil, this sort of it's kind of like a shamrock. And it was a very common motif in the Gothic revival era. And I think Harold Mighton actually made a point as well in one of his works about graveyards that in the Victorian era, so it became so popular and more people were able to afford headstones at that point in time. So there was a massive increase in the numbers of people having headstones. And they exhibit the style and detailing of that time. So the result has been that in the present day, we associate typical grave markers with the grave markers of the Victorian era with this Gothic revival design. So we've quite a few of these that have sort of curvilinear tops and trefoilated heads. And oops, I keep moving the screen, so sorry. And then to the left-hand side here, there's a pointed arch. We've 3 or 4 of this particular type of headstone as well. And it has chamfered corners, and it has little gablets to each side there, and a trefoil on top, and a roll mold along. So it's just really, really nicely detailed with a lot of care. So other symbols like tracery and decorative motifs like bosses were also popular in this time. So then we have crosses. So crosses also formed part of the Gothic revival, and they became particularly popular in Ireland as the motif was adopted later by the Gaelic revival around the turn of the century. So low inscribed crosses formed part of headstones, and some are freestanding crosses. And these often emulate the early medieval high crosses in their form and detailing, with these ringed crosses, these 3 ringed crosses here, very similar to the Doherty cross and the West Cross, which you saw an image of earlier. Very similar in design and form. So they're probably the most popular monument type in the graveyard. There's 50 ringed crosses. And that doesn't even include the other types of crosses. There's a number of others. In the central image there, you can see the grave in the headstone in the background. Can you see that? There's like a small freestand, a small cross on top of the headstone there. But just the ringed crosses alone, which they were popular throughout the 20th century. So these are some of the older ones, but there's quite a few new ones as well. These are some more examples of the newer ones. This one on the left is very new actually, and I really like this one because I think when you see the number of polished granite headstones in a sort of unsuitable style that have been put in place in the last number of years, and then you see this stone which was put in place in the last number of years, which also really emulates the very traditional stones which were there. And I think this kind of shows what it would be possible to do if people were putting in new headstones. It's possible to do that without you don't have, you can there are good choices, I suppose, in terms of preserving the heritage of the place. So it's not uncommon as well for some of the stones to have, generally overall it's not uncommon for stones to be inscribed with Irish, in the Irish language, with Clo Gaelic. This is what we call Clo Gaelic script, which was what the Irish language was written in, I suppose, until recent decades. We only have, I think we have eight. We have 13 headstones which are inscribed, whose inscriptions are in Irish, in the Irish language, and there's 2 or 3 that use this script in the graveyard as well. So this is another slightly unusual one in white marble with the Sacred Heart and the cross. There are about 8 plain crosses as well as the ringed crosses that are in the graveyard. And one of the other things that became popular in the Victorian era was ironwork. So in the Victorian era, it became popular for fencing and garden ornaments and balconets around windows and that sort of thing. And it was being mass produced at a couple of different places in the country, and they did some really nice decorative work. So you often see little railings around graves like this. This is the only example that is in Kilfenora. There is a smaller wrought iron one around one of the other plots, but this is the only decorative cast iron one in the graveyard. And these emulate an earlier idea, which was called a mort safe. And a mort safe literally was put in place to protect the grave from grave robbers. So it was a protection of the grave. So this, I don't think it was actually serviceable as a mort safe, but it was probably a later take on that idea with a more decorative focus. So this is an obelisk with a cross on top. There's 2 of this type in the graveyard, and I really like these as well. I think these are really nicely carved, and they sort of give a bit of verticality amongst the lower ones as well. But they're nicely decoratively carved. And then we have the ledgers. So the ledgers are the oldest of the graves. There's quite a few of these, as I mentioned, in the chancel. So I suppose the burials that would have taken place within the church, within the chancel, would have been the most important people, probably landowners or members of the clergy, as is the case still. I suppose the people with plenty of money would have been able to be buried close to the church or within the church. But I suppose if you couldn't be buried within the church, the closer you could get, the better it was considered to be. So there's a few of these dotted around the graveyard. Some of them have been reused and placed on top of graves that also have a headstone. So we actually haven't recorded most of these yet now. We had planned to do a nighttime recording session where we would use the low light and the light of a torch or something, which assists in, if they're difficult to read, the shadows that's created by a torch can allow you to decipher the inscription. But we are actually planning on using photogrammetry now, which involves taking loads and loads of pictures of the item and then stitching them together using special software in order to create an image which you can then sort of adapt and maneuver in order to get a better sense of the inscription. So that's our plan for the ledgers. So we're hoping to get that done before the end of the year. So I won't go into them now, but they do have some nice decorative detail. And this one, you can actually just about see the IHS in the sunburst, the radial sunburst there on the outside at the top of the stone, and then the contrast with the contrast between that and then the actual inscription. So you can see the inscription it's been gone over at some point, and somebody has sort of redone it, because the inscription is quite clear there, whereas the decorative detail is not. So some of the decorative details we've come across, the IHS, as I mentioned, that comes up quite often. So IHS is what we call a Christogram, which means it is an abbreviation of the name of Jesus Christ. And in this case, I believe IHS comes from the Greek name for Jesus. So that shows up quite a lot. And then we see a lot of RIP. So I suppose in terms of the other languages, we've very few classical languages appearing in the inscriptions. So there's not many outside of the cathedral where Latin is used, for example. So I suppose you could argue that RIP could actually be considered to be the Latin phrasing. So the IHS became popular from around the 12th century, and often in combination with that sort of sunburst radial motif. They were used on a lot of gravestones from about then, and that seems to have really lasted because they're still popular very much up until the present day. Then we have the Sacred Heart, which you can see an image here on the lower picture. You also get cherubs and angels and fruit. And I suppose in the late medieval period and in the early modern period, the symbols which appeared on a headstone would actually be representative of maybe you might have tools which would represent the deceased's actual trade, or certain flowers would represent certain things. So ivy is some ivy in this next one. Ivy represents longevity. And then there's shamrock on this one. There's the IHS as well on this one, and there's shamrock. And the shamrock often appear on Irish headstones, I suppose, too. I suppose as part of that became a feature of headstones as part of the Gaelic revival as well, I suppose. And you can just see on the top of this, on the top of the shaft of this headstone here, there's a scroll going down along, zigzagging down along the shaft that says, "Thy will be done." So, and this IHS then is on one of the headstones, and as you can see the marks there where it's actually been almost all but removed. It's hard to make it out, and this comes from aggressive scrubbing or cleaning of the headstone, probably using a mechanical tool, which is not really something that is advised by the Heritage Council guidelines on the maintenance of headstones. We're not even supposed to do, when we're doing our graveyard recording, we're not even supposed to use chalk rubbings anymore, because that was a thing that was advised at one point in terms of deciphering inscriptions, to use a rubbing. But we're not supposed to do that anymore because it can actually cause a lot of damage to the inscription. And I suppose the eventual outcome is the inscription will wear away. So I think people do this in a well-meaning way to make the inscription, to make the decorative detail more clear, but actually what you're ultimately doing is you're wearing away, contributing to the weathering. So you're going to wear away the detail that can be seen, and you can see that really here where the IHS is just barely visible now. And then you can see the lichens on the arms of the cross there. So they were probably covering this whole cross, and the lichens, when they're there, can contribute to the preservation of the inscription, the preservation of the font. So we try to preserve it where we can. So this in a contrast then of this is the close up of that nice headstone I had earlier. So you can see the text, the inscription, which was created probably more than likely by hand, and the nice font, and the sort of patina of age created by the layers of lichen, the different lichens that are on the surface there. One of the interesting things about inscriptions that we've noticed and that you see in headstones is that the stonemasons were often not actually literate. So they were craftspeople who were able to create this image, which happened to be of text on the headstones, but for a long time they may not actually have been able to read what they were writing. So sometimes you see, you might see like there might be no gap between letters where we would say there should be a gap, or you might see a word that's cut in half that ends at one end of the line and begins again at the second end of the line, or begins on the next line down, which is quite interesting to see. So as part of the present phase of the survey, so this image leads me into the next component, we commissioned Paul Whelan, who is a lichenologist, to carry out a survey of the lichen species that are in the graveyard, and he sent us his report last week. And it's actually really, really fascinating reading. So this is the list of all of the lichens that he identified in the graveyards. There are 28 of them altogether. So lichens and mosses often colonize the surface of grave markers, and as I said, they contribute positively to the patina of age of the memorials and to the overall historical character of the site. They can preserve the surface of the memorial from deterioration, and they also serve as a food source for species such as birds and rodents, providing nesting materials for birds. So it's advised against removing them. And in and of themselves, they are of ecological significance as they derive their nutrients solely from the air. They can be used as an indicator for air quality. So pollutants or heavy metals can be deadly for some lichen species. And then there are other lichen species that actually are an indicator that will thrive, for example, in a nitrogen-rich environment. So you can see some lichens that will grow when there's really good quality air, and some lichens which will grow when there's a lot of nitrogen in the air. So there's 28 different species here, and he noted that this graveyard is still a haven for calcareous lichens, and he said it is a credit to the keepers, as many Irish graveyards are losing their lichen biodiversity at an alarming rate due to excessive cleaning and spraying. So as you can see, the different lichens colonize different materials. So most of them are on limestone, so the walls, the headstones. Some of them are on I'm not sure if I'm going to pronounce this right now, siliceous rock. I should have checked that before I started. So that is basically the sandstone, the variety of sandstone which is south of the Burren area. So like in the southern part of Kilfenora, this type of stone is the bedrock, and then some of them grow or colonize the mortar, which is in the walls enclosing the graveyard and also on the cathedral walls themselves. So he looked at the lichens on the headstones and the wall and noted that a recently rebuilt wall actually at the east end of the graveyard, which had partially collapsed a couple of years ago, and it was rebuilt. And he commented that the lichens had not been cleaned off. The wall hadn't been cleaned when it was rebuilt, which was a good thing. So the lichens remain intact. So he particularly notes this headstone here, which is in the northwest corner of the graveyard. And he says this headstone is a time capsule of past environmental conditions. This local limestone headstone is rich in lichen species. Such a headstone is home to lichens that started growing at the time the stone was clean and put in place, and they reflect the air conditions that existed then. So cleaning such a headstone would not only destroy the individual species, but it is unlikely they would ever return again, instead being replaced by those that can survive in today's environment. So if this was cleaned, as has happened to some of the gravestones in the site, the lichens which grew on them, which reflected the air conditions maybe 200 years ago, would not come back, and they would be replaced by probably something that would come back a lot slower, and we would lose this amazing patina as well. So yeah, and then he just pointed out as well that the polished granite actually doesn't provide so much of a foothold for the lichens. It's so smooth and has such a strong polish that the lichens can't actually get foothold on it. So so the native limestone is better for the lichens, better for biodiversity as well. Also, there are certain lichens that thrive on the vertical and certain lichens that thrive on the horizontal, and some lichens which apparently like to face towards the sun and some which like to face away from the sun. So it's a whole new world which I certainly wasn't aware of previously to this extent, but it's really, really interesting. And we'll try and make this study available. If anyone is interested and would like to read it, please let me know. But we'll try and make it available. We can probably let you know through Burrenbeo maybe when it's available or where it's going to be located. So then the second thing we planned to do this year as part of our survey was to do some demographic analysis of the results of our spreadsheet. So all of the survey record sheets which were created by the group last year, were all fed into a spreadsheet, and we have all of that information ready to go. We're going to try to complete any gaps this year now with any information we can gather in the survey days that are going on as part of the current year. So one of the things we did was some demographic analysis. So we took all of the recorded inscriptions and broke them down to create an entry on a new spreadsheet for each individual who's named on any inscription. So we have 685 entries for individuals interred at the graveyard. Some of these are incomplete. So for example, in the case of some individuals, the name and relationship to another person on the inscription might be given, but not the date of the person's death. And in some cases, a headstone has been erected with a family name, but the individuals' names have yet to be put on the inscription. But it is very interesting. So we have a date of death for 576 of the individuals that we have on the list, and I've just put a screen grab up here just to show you, because I noted that 1905 stands out as a year in which there was an enormous number of deaths in that year. There was 54 deaths in that year, and of these 31 were infants. So you can see here there's quite a few just in this clip who, like, there's one person there who was 58 at the time of death, but for the most part the people who died in 1905 had just been born in that year. And it really stands out when you look at the list, because there's usually maybe 4 or 5 or 6 in most years. Some years there's none at all, but 1905, this is a huge number. So I think we'll have to try to dig a little bit deeper to see what happened in 1905 in the locality, because this, just from looking at this is a really sad event that must have happened, that so many small babies passed away in this year. So that's something we're going to look at a little bit more as well. We just have some graphics as well. So we have this showing the dates of death. So most of the burials, most of the inscriptions that are recorded on the headstones are from the 20th century, with a few from the 19th century and a couple from the earlier, from the 18th century. So I suppose this just reflects the increasing popularity of headstones and of people being able to afford to erect a headstone for their family in that period. And then we also looked at the breakdown of gender. So we have 350 of the individuals mentioned in inscriptions are male and 271 are female. And then some of the inscriptions refer to, for example, all the members of X family. We also have, I don't know if you can see it in this clip, but we also have place names. So when the place names are recorded, we'll include those. And the focus of inscriptions on grave markers have altered over time. The tone variously celebrates the life of the interred, or maybe the intentions of the person who erected the memorial. It might express grief, or it might exhibit an awareness of death or the afterlife. And the inscription reflects something about the way of life, or the morals, or the attitudes towards death at the time of the erection of the memorial. And they can be further examined in order to determine what attitudes have been expressed throughout the history of use. So there was a nice one here. This commemorates 15-year-old Pat K. Campbell, who died in 1869. And the inscription reads, "He was young, had drooped in the morn of his day. His sun has gone down in the too early night. But weep not, the Master has called him away, where the faithful shall meet in that city of light." So I think you get a sense of the mason here, and the carving of the letters, and the capitalization of some letters, and the not having capitalized other letters, and punctuation, that sort of thing. So this one was, as you can see, tricky to decipher, but quite fun to decipher as well, I think. So, and we also looked at mentions of relationships on gravestones. So, for example, you see son of, daughter of, husband of quite frequently. We looked for terms of endearment or references to the afterlife. In loving memory, as I mentioned, RIP show up quite frequently, and some are more detailed, such as this one, and some are quite evocative, such as this one. This stone was erected by the father of the man, of the boy who had died, who is known only as Campbell. So it says the stone was erected by Campbell in memory of his son, Pat K. There's quite a few discrepancies in the inscriptions. So as I mentioned, some of them don't mention the date of death. There's quite a few that mention places, and quite a few that don't. So one of the things we're hoping to do next is to consult parish death and burial records, and maybe see if there's some more records that could be consulted, so we can fill in those gaps. And this will create a more coherent picture, I think, for anybody who's trying to do any genealogical research. It would be useful, I think, for them to have that extra information, and for us to be able to build up a more complete picture. So what's next? We're going to complete the record of the graveyard using photogrammetry for the worn inscriptions. We are going to compare local death and burial records with demographic information gleaned from the inscriptions. And we, as part of the Heritage Council funding this year, part of our proposal was to carry out a workshop in the local St Attracta's and St Fachnan's primary school with 4th, 5th and 6th class. So we'll be doing that hopefully in September or October, and that will involve going into the school and chatting to the kids, and discussing a little bit about what you can learn from graveyards. And we'll take them out and record some inscriptions and show them some techniques, and hopefully instill a sense of belonging and place in the kids, and give them an awareness of their local heritage, and why it's important, and why it's relevant for them, and why it should be minded as well. So then the last thing that we're hoping to do, maybe not this year, but maybe in the next phase of the survey, is to make all the information that we have publicly available. So we're hoping to create some sort of searchable database using GIS, hopefully. Also, Clare County Council have Clare Library, have a page on their website where they have a list of graveyard records which have been donated from various surveys. So I think it would be a good idea to add our information once it's totally complete and checked and everything to that as well, because that's, I suppose, somewhere that people would be a first stop for a lot of people. So, and this is just an image of one of the publications that we used to inform the report and our survey, Guidance for the Care, Conservation and Recording of Historic Graveyards. So there's this book is available from the Heritage Council, and it's really useful. It has loads of information about looking after stonework, looking after ironwork, looking after the ecology of your graveyard, and treating the graveyard as it is obviously very important to the community as an ongoing burial site, and it's also part of our a focus point in our community, I think, and understanding the character of the graveyard and the heritage character will help us hopefully to preserve that. So it's historically interesting due to its long association with the medieval church and cathedral on the site. And there are numerous burials which have been marked by unworked, uninscribed stones. But it's likely that the use of this site as a burial ground extends further back into the history of the church. So the graveyard considerably enhances the atmosphere and setting of the cathedral, and it is significant for the local community as the final resting place of family members, often going over several hundred years. So that is all I have to say. I hope I stayed in time, Pranjali. And thank you very much for listening. And I just wanted to say thank you very much to the Heritage Council and the Community Grant Scheme for funding this project, and to the Burrenbeo Trust and the Burren Conservation Volunteer Group. All of the names of the people who participated in the training days should be there. Elaine Lynch for her never-ending positivity and knowledge. Paul Whelan, the lichenologist, who has definitely awakened a new interest in me anyway. Chris Wood and Claire Lanigan, who did a lot of data entry and analysis and been great. And DigiClaire and Clare County Council, who let me use the hub in Ennistimon tonight to do this with the good internet, so I wouldn't disappear out in the middle of it.
Thank you very much, Edel. That was wonderful. Really well told, the story of all that you have uncovered in the graveyard. You're bang on time. It's just 9 o'clock.
Oh, great.
So we're happy to extend this a bit if anyone has burning questions they have to ask before Edel goes. But so far, just thank you for an informative talk from Catherine, and thanks from Ardca Clonalby Heritage Society. We have some of the same completed and some great info to help us. Really, really enjoyed. Thank you so much, Edel. So, just really lots of appreciation for your talk and all the work you put into telling the story. I was interested in asking you of which was the oldest and the sort of newest grave, but I think you answered that question when you showed that graph. It's interesting to see that was, at least from the evidence that is currently visible, it seems looking easily 200 or 300 years of continuous usage.
It might be 1702.
Yeah. And it's Kilfenora. How unique is Kilfenora graveyard or St Fachnan's graveyard in the context of Irish graveyards?
Oh, well, I suppose it's very similar to a lot of them in that you see a lot like Newhaville, Kilnaboy. There's a lot of graveyards that are centered on medieval churches.
Yeah.
I think. So in one respect, it's very similar to a lot of others, but I suppose they're all complete individuals as well. They all have their own characteristics. There'd be a lot of similarities in terms of the carving, the type of headstones that you'd see there. But I think there's a really nice variety of headstones in Kilfenora. It's quite individual, I suppose.
It's fascinating. Yeah. Thanks very much. And we've recorded the webinar, so we'll put it up on YouTube for anyone who's missed it and who would like to rewatch it. But good luck, Edel, with the rest of the research, and we look forward to further findings on this beautiful place.
Thank you everybody for listening.
Have a good evening, everyone. Good night.